In the early 1970s, the American automobile industry was going through a dramatic transformation. For decades, large and powerful cars had dominated the roads. Big V8 engines, long bodies, and high horsepower were the pride of American manufacturers. Owning a powerful car was part of the culture. It represented freedom, strength, and status. But by the beginning of the 1970s, that era was starting to fade. Fuel prices were rising, environmental regulations were becoming stricter, and insurance costs for powerful cars were increasing rapidly. At the same time, small imported vehicles from Europe and Japan were becoming more popular with American buyers. These smaller cars were cheaper, more fuel efficient, and easier to drive in crowded cities. Ford realized that the market was changing, and the company needed a new type of car to compete. The plan was simple but ambitious. Ford wanted to build a small, lightweight, and affordable car that could compete directly with the growing number of imported compact vehicles. The project was given two strict rules. First, the car had to cost less than $2,000. Second, the car had to weigh less than 2,000 pounds. Those two requirements would shape every engineering decision that followed. Normally, designing and developing a completely new car could take more than 40 months. Engineers had to design the structure, test the engine, run safety evaluations, and perform countless adjustments before production could begin. But Ford wanted to move much faster. The company pushed the entire development process forward at an extremely aggressive pace. Engineers worked long hours under intense pressure, trying to meet the strict cost and weight targets while also completing the design in record time. Incredibly, the entire car went from concept to production in just 25 months. When the vehicle was finally introduced in 1971, it was called the Ford Pinto. At first, the Pinto seemed like exactly what the market needed. It was small, simple, and inexpensive. For many American families who were feeling the pressure of rising fuel costs, the Pinto appeared to be a practical solution. The car sold well during its early years. Thousands of drivers bought Pintos for commuting, running errands, and everyday travel. It was easy to maintain, affordable to operate, and widely available at Ford dealerships across the country. For a while, everything looked successful. But hidden inside the design of the car was a problem that would eventually become one of the most controversial issues in automotive history. The issue involved the location of the fuel tank. In the Pinto, the fuel tank was placed behind the rear axle and close to the rear bumper. At the time, this arrangement was not completely unusual for small cars. However, the space around the tank in the Pinto was limited, and certain structural components were located very close to it. During some types of rear-end collisions, these nearby components could potentially damage the tank. If the tank ruptured during a crash, gasoline could leak out. In rare situations, that leaking fuel could ignite if it came into contact with sparks or hot metal parts created during the collision. During early testing stages, engineers noticed that under specific crash conditions, the fuel tank could be vulnerable. Some engineers suggested several modifications that could reduce the risk. These included adding protective shields, reinforcing certain structural areas, or slightly redesigning components around the rear of the vehicle. None of these solutions were especially complicated. The cost of implementing them would have been only a few dollars per vehicle. However, the Pinto project had already been designed around strict cost and weight limits. Introducing design changes could delay production and increase manufacturing costs. Because of these pressures, the car entered full production without those additional modifications. For the first few years, the Pinto continued to sell and operate like any other compact car on American roads. But gradually, reports of unusual accidents began to appear. Some rear-end collisions involving Pintos were followed by fires. At first, the reports were scattered and not widely discussed. But over time, the number of incidents receiving attention slowly increased. Journalists and safety advocates began asking questions. Could the design of the fuel system have contributed to these fires? Could the problem have been prevented? These questions began spreading through newspapers, television reports, and public discussions. What had once been a simple compact car was suddenly becoming the center of a national debate. By the mid-1970s, the story surrounding the Ford Pinto was growing larger every year, and soon the controversy would become impossible for the industry to ignore. By the late 1970s, the debate surrounding the Ford Pinto had reached a national level. Media outlets across the country were discussing the car, and safety advocates were demanding answers. Government regulators began investigating the situation more closely. Crash reports were reviewed, engineering data was studied, and experts examined the design of the fuel system in detail. Public attention continued to grow as more information surfaced. The Pinto was no longer just a compact car sold by Ford. It had become a symbol in a larger conversation about engineering responsibility, safety standards, and corporate decision-making. Eventually, the pressure led to a major decision. In 1978, Ford announced a large recall of Pinto vehicles. Approximately 1.5 million cars were called back, so that dealers could install modifications designed to improve the protection of the fuel tank during rear-end collisions. At the time, it was one of the largest recalls the automotive industry had ever seen. Dealerships across the country began performing the updates. Additional protective components were installed around the fuel tank in order to reduce the risk of fuel leakage during certain types of crashes. But by that point, the Pinto's public image had already changed dramatically. For many people, the name Pinto had become permanently connected with controversy. Even though millions of the cars had been driven safely for years, the reputation of the vehicle had been deeply affected. Legal cases followed, and the Pinto quickly became one of the most widely studied examples in discussions about safety and corporate ethics. Business schools and engineering programs began analyzing the story in classrooms. Students studied the decisions made during the car's development and debated how companies should balance cost, safety, and responsibility. Despite all the controversy, the Pinto still had another side to its story. For countless owners, it remained simply a practical car. It carried people to work, transported groceries home, and drove families across towns and cities every single day. Many Pintos operated for years without any serious problems. To those drivers, it was just a small, affordable vehicle that did its job. Over time, however, the larger impact of the Pinto story became clear. The controversy pushed the entire automotive industry to take safety concerns more seriously. Manufacturers began conducting more detailed crash testing, and regulators introduced stronger safety standards for fuel systems and vehicle structures. In a strange way, the Pinto helped change the future of automobile safety. Today, it is extremely rare to see a Ford Pinto still on the road. Most of them disappeared decades ago as they were replaced by newer vehicles. Yet the story continues to be remembered in automotive history. The Pinto began as a simple attempt to build an affordable compact car during a changing era. It succeeded in reaching millions of drivers across the country. But it also became one of the most debated vehicles ever produced. And because of that, the story of the Ford Pinto continues to be told even today. Now I want to hear your opinion. Had you ever heard the full story of the Ford Pinto before? Do you think the controversy could have been avoided if certain design decisions had been handled differently? Share your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one. And if you enjoy exploring fascinating automotive stories like this, make sure you subscribe to the channel. Every week, we dive into another incredible piece of automotive history.